and a terrible threat to us all, increasing the danger of more death and destruction, economic hardship, hunger, climate degradation, a protracted war or worse, a nuclear confrontation between the two most heavily armed nuclear nations in the world, the United States and Russia. We need a negotiated settlement. We need diplomacy. We need the White House and Congress to come to their senses and stop fueling this proxy war between the U.S. and Russia with billions of dollars in weapons. We strongly support the continuation of humanitarian aid and the acceptance of refugees. We applaud the brave individuals in Ukraine and Russia who use nonviolent tactics to oppose this war and all wars. Our domestic needs are urgent. We need food for the hungry, healthcare and housing for all, fully funded public education, and a green transition to lessen the climate crisis. Every dollar we spend on weapons, ammunition, missiles, and military training is a dollar stolen from our communities at home. We are asking the public to join us as we call for an end to the war in Ukraine. We are asking everyone to contact their members of Congress, urging them to ask President Biden to start peace negotiations now. Diplomacy, not escalation. There's a petition going around that we will give to our members of Congress, and we're asking you to call again your members of Congress, senators, and representatives. Use the Capitol switchboard number 202-224-3121, and you should have all got a copy of this message with the number to call. Thank you.
The horrors of war, you can see every night on television, but some here have experienced the horrors of war. And so I'd like to call up our next speaker, Mark Foreman, who's been a leader for a long time in the Veterans for Peace chapter here in Milwaukee.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Another beautiful day in Wisconsin. Well, I was a teacher. I learned how to extend my voice to the back of the room, but this will help. My name is Mark Foreman. I was a Navy corpsman attached to the Marines and sent to Vietnam in 1968. It was my job when a Marine was wounded to stop the bleeding and keep them breathing until a medevac chopper came to take them to a field hospital. I was severely wounded 5 weeks after arriving in Vietnam and sent to Bethesda Naval Hospital, where I spent 8 months in a body cast. While in the body cast, I did a lot of reading about American foreign policy to try and understand why the United States government felt it necessary to go to war with Vietnam, and most of all, to find out who profits from war. The more I read, the more angry and disgusted I become towards my government's foreign policy. Soon after being discharged from the hospital, I found a book called War is a Racket. Raise your hand if you've read this book. Okay, War is a Racket. Everyone needs to read this. It gives a whole different perspective on what creates war. But I don't want to get distracted here. All right, soon after I was discharged from the hospital, I found a book called War is a Racket, written by General Smedley Butler. General Butler spent 33 years in the Marines and was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor not once, but twice. It was the highest award given to any officer at that time. After being discharged from the Marines, he spent a lot of time researching who profited from war and how much they were profiting. That's when he wrote the book, War is a Racket. He discovered that corporations and big businesses who were supplying the war effort were charging 1,000 to 2,000% more than what they charged in peacetime. They've got us around the neck. General Butler ended up believing that war will never end until we find a way to take the profit out of it. to stop this madness, don't we?
Yes.
Thanks so much, Mark. Can I just see how many people have in fact been to war somehow or another? All right, very good. So this 2 minutes goes really fast, so we're going to see if we can move it along here. I'd like to next call up the co-founder and longtime leader of Peace Action Wisconsin, Julie Enslow.
The war in the Ukraine brings us to a time of unprecedented danger. This January, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists moved the hands of their nuclear doomsday clock forward from 100 seconds to midnight to 90 seconds to midnight. The clock now stands the closest to global nuclear catastrophe it has ever been. Closer than during the Cuban Missile Crisis. This is largely because of the mounting dangers of the war in Ukraine. The increasing escalation of this war places the world's two nuclear superpowers, Russia and the United States, nose to nose in a conflict that could lead to a nuclear war and the end of life on the planet as we know it. Now more than ever, we, the people, need to call for our leaders to begin serious efforts toward a negotiated settlement and a ceasefire to this dreadful war. The people of Ukraine are the suffering victims, not only of the illegal invasion by the Russian army, but as the pawns in a superpower chess game. But we could all be the victims of this conflict if it escalates and Russia uses tactical nuclear weapons. Once the nuclear genie is released, there is little chance of putting it back in the bottle. There are 12,700 nuclear weapons on the planet. The vast majority belong to the US and to Russia, with nearly 6,000 each. Since Russia recently pulled out of the New START treaty, there are no more nuclear weapons treaties in effect on the planet between the US and Russia. Scientists say it would only take 100 nuclear weapons to create a nuclear winter on the planet, wiping out the light of the sun and destroying most of life on Earth. No one can win a nuclear war. We love our children. The Ukrainians love their children, and the Russians love their children. The war in Ukraine could be the nuclear trigger for the death of them all. That is why we say today to all sides, call for a ceasefire, negotiate a just settlement, and end this war now.
Thanks so much, Julie. So this is a nonpartisan group, of course, but we do need to pressure the government. That's why we do petitions. We have lobby visits. You'll hear more about that in a little. But I'd like to now have some of the folks who are really part of our movement, who have taken the energy to run for office and gotten elected, and therefore are helpful in supporting our goals and advancing the move toward peace. And so I'd like to call up now Steve Shade, who's been a leader on many good issues, and especially peace, and has gotten the county board to do peaceful things. And here he is.
Thank you, Steve. And I see my fellow supervisor, Ryan Clancy, is also here today. Supervisor Clancy and I, even though we're county supervisors, and he's also a state representative as well, we take oaths to defend the Constitution when we take office. Now, at the Constitutional Convention, the greatest mind there was Ben Franklin. And Ben Franklin said, there was never a good war nor a bad peace. And the greatest American mind of the 19th century, Abe Lincoln, said, there is nothing good in war but its end. And one of his most successful generals, William Tecumseh Sherman, perhaps put it best of all. War is hell. And he wasn't joking, because he knew what it was. He saw it firsthand. Every dollar spent in war is theft from all of us, but especially the poor. And a lot of billions and billions of dollars goes into destroying old wealth, killing a lot of people, and leaving untold numbers with injuries, both physical and mental, that they will carry forward the rest of their lives. Now, St. Francis, who this institution is named after, he was a man of peace. He was also a disciple of Jesus Christ. And Jesus, although if you read the Gospels, he didn't spend a lot of time talking about war, but he did say something very, very important. He said, "Blessed are the peacemakers." I think that tells us all we need to know about his opinion about war. And I know I'm preaching to the converted here because I see peacemakers right out there in this audience. So let's continue our work, and I think we have a real chance for peace right now. China has proposed a multiple-point peace plan. Even if it's not perfect, it can certainly be the basis for the road ahead to peace. So, let's keep at it, folks. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Steve. So he's sort of halfway introduced the next speaker, Ryan Clancy. He's got his, 2 feet in 2 different levels of government, and therefore eminently qualified to speak to us.
So thank you for having me here today, folks. I'll try my best. I've got a new familiarity with microphones. It seems like everywhere I go, there's one in front of me. I've passed through and I've observed and I've lived in many areas of armed conflict. And I've done that enough and I've seen enough to know that we cannot bomb our way out of the conflict in Ukraine, that we cannot kill our way out of the conflict in Ukraine, we cannot arm the people there in a way that will bring us to peace. And yet when you bring this concept up to folks, the concept of a ceasefire or a pause in the fighting, they equate that with surrender. They equate that with giving up or capitulation. And it is not. Peace is hard work, and it is work that I know everybody in this room has been engaged in. And I'm grateful for your work and to be a small part of it. The idea of active peace is not a new one, and I don't often quote people, but I want to quote Shane Claiborne here, who writes, "Peace is not just about the absence of conflict, it's also about the presence of justice. Martin Luther King Jr. even distinguished between the devil's peace and true peace. A counterfeit peace exists when people are pacified or distracted or so beat up and tired of fighting that all seems calm. But true peace does not exist until there is justice, restoration, forgiveness. Peacemaking does not mean passivity. It's the act of interrupting injustice without mirroring injustice. The act of disarming evil without destroying the evildoer. The act of finding a third way that is neither fight nor flight, but the careful, arduous pursuit of reconciliation and justice. It is about a revolution of love that is big enough to set both the oppressed and the oppressors free. We cannot arm and kill our way towards peace in Ukraine, and it is not just for our response to the horrific invasion of Ukraine by an imperialist power to be acting as another imperialist power in throwing weapons into the conflict. A pause in the fighting would allow the restoration of civil society and civil infrastructure necessary to gather the peace for a sustained active peace. And peace in Ukraine must be and can only be an active peace based in accountability for atrocities and with justice as the goal. Every day of war and every dollar we throw at military rather than civil might makes these goals harder to achieve. I stand with the call for a ceasefire, for peace talks, and to end the U.S. funding for this war and for an active peace in Ukraine. Thank you to each of you for your work and advocacy on this.
Thank you, Ryan, for your work. We're especially pleased in this vein of being not even nonpartisan, but multi-partisan in a sense. We have someone we haven't worked with before, but it's been working out well so far. We have a person who's been a candidate for state office, and that is Philip Anderson, the former chair of the Wisconsin Libertarian Party.
Thanks, Steve. I typed out one of my remarks. Any of you who've been on a Zoom with me so far know that I like to talk a lot, so I wanted to keep this under 2 minutes, so I'm going to be watching for the card pop up. I did want to mention briefly, though, about war profiteering. Those who've served in Iraq and Afghanistan can testify to this small nugget of truth. The soldiers that I know that were served there weren't even allowed to do their own laundry. They were required to pay $5 per bag of laundry to do that, and then Halliburton or whoever then charged the military $100 for that. That's just a small thing, it's just laundry, but it goes to talk to how deeply the profiteering is ensconced in the whole operation over there and what it's really for. My name is Phil Anderson. I am a former member of the Libertarian National Committee, former chair of the State Libertarian Party, former candidate for governor and U.S. Senate. Some would call me a serial candidate, but I just can't help speaking up. I'm also a member of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, so this conflict is especially important to me, and I did serve as a medic in the 6th Battalion, 3rd Air Defense Artillery in West Germany. There's a lot of this issue that rings true and rings important to me. I'm very grateful to be here with all these peace activists who on a daily basis give of their time and resources to fight for peace. For those of you who don't, it's amazing to me to see how much effort and blood, sweat, and tears is put into this. Now, in inviting me, and this has happened, we could have easily dwelled on our differences, and then I wouldn't be here. I and others here hold Frederick Douglass's statement dear, that we would unite with anybody to do right and with nobody to do wrong. And I guess that's why I qualify as here. So, does the applause count toward my 2 minutes? Okay. So here I am as a representative of a party that has stood for peace, stood against every single war, pointed out the lies and manipulation of our politicians and government, and decried the corrupting influence of money in politics since our inception in 1971. The war in Ukraine must end now. Actually, all wars must end. As Julian Assange has said, all wars begin with lies. We need to hold the two-party propaganda machine accountable for lying us into wars. We need to vote for dissenting voices. We need to rise up and demand change. Further, we must cut off the fuel for the massive propaganda machine, and that is the dreamt-up right that corporations have for free speech. That idea has allowed soulless corporations to drown out the truth, divide well-meaning people by playing to the worst in our human natures, and distort the discussion of the issues among informed citizens, discussion that is the bedrock of how we allow ourselves to be governed. It's time to dismantle the war machine and shut off the inhuman source of inflammatory lies. No more war in Ukraine, no more wars at all, and no more lies that lead to wars. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I mentioned lobbying, and it's not everybody's cup of tea, but there's a group in town that's really, really good at it, the Friends Committee on National Legislation. And Roger Hansen is one of the leaders of that group, and he's going to speak to us now.
It's good to be with all of you here today. I'm Roger Hansen, representing Friends Committee on National Legislation. We're a Quaker-based organization which has been advocating for peace and justice now for 70 years, and more specifically, I'm with the Milwaukee advocacy team, which is one of over 130 teams around the country, all doing grassroots advocacy and lobbying. FCNL, while opposing the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and I'm quoting from the direct statements here, urges all parties to seek an immediate ceasefire. We support nonviolent responses to the conflict and a negotiated settlement to secure a just and sustainable peace that can only be achieved through peaceful means. Almost by definition, peacemaking involves engaging with people making war and understanding the reasons that they do so, but nevertheless, our job is to seek and make real the peaceful alternatives to armed conflict and to ensure that the long-lasting human costs of war are not forgotten or neglected. And other speakers here are speaking very eloquently to the nuclear dangers and the sheer loss of life of all of these precious children of God who are being slaughtered in this war. We call on the governments of Ukraine, Russia, all the neighboring countries, the United States, NATO, and the European Union, all to explore all avenues, whether public or private, for renewed conversation to address the human security needs of all the peoples and countries in the region, to provide the basis for a long-term peace. And only after we look at the real way we can achieve security in this country can we get a lasting peace.
Thanks, Roger. As we try to get out the word on peace things, sometimes it's hard. We'd hope that all kinds of television crews would show up for this, but it's been hard to get a hearing for the peace movement. And part of that is that people that do independent thinking about journalism sometimes have a really hard time with our government if they go against the government or party line. Someone who keeps reminding us of this is Ann Batista, who's the National Organizing Committee for Assange Defense, and will speak to us now.
Well, I want to thank you, Steve, and thank everybody who came out today. It's great to see everyone here. It would be even better if we saw more people who were reporting for our corporate and state media. So back in 2011, talking about the war in Afghanistan, Julian Assange presciently said, "The goal is an endless war, not a successful war." Given the actions of our leaders today, is the goal of the Ukraine war an endless war, not a successful war? Who benefits from an endless war in Ukraine? Does Raytheon benefit? Does Boeing benefit? Do the recipients of their campaign donations in Congress and in the White House benefit? Certainly the Ukrainian people do not benefit. It's time to stop the killing. It's time to stop the war profiteers. And it's time to negotiate a peace. So, why has Julian Assange effectively been imprisoned for over 12 years? First in the Ecuadorian embassy and now in the UK's Belmarsh prison for terrorists and murderers for the last 4 years? I would suggest the reason why is because he exposed U.S. war crimes while the war was in progress. Another effect of his imprisonment, is that it makes other journalists and publishers reluctant to expose U.S. crimes while they are in progress. And it's really important for those of us who are in the peace community to be sure that we have courageous journalists and publishers who are going to speak the truth about war. So I want to also invite all of you, Julian's father and brother are going to be here April 8th in person to answer questions about a movie called Ithaca at the Oriental Theater, April 8th, 6 p.m. And they'll show the movie and then they will be present for the Q&A afterward. So I say to all of you, as everyone here is saying, it's time to stop the killing. It's time to stop the war profiteers. And it's time to negotiate a peace in Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Ann. You know, I wasn't sure if this format would work with trying to hold people to 2 minutes. Sounds like sort of prioritizing quantity over quality, but the quality has been great. And with just 2 minutes or so, people really have to get to the point fast. And so it's working well for me. Next up is maybe the longest term activist on peace here. I'm not sure on that, but you know him from the Samaria Catholic Workers House and Movement, and also as an Anglican priest, perhaps. Don Timmerman.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I thought about why the Americans always think that you can solve a problem with weapons. If you think about it, the way that we try to stop gun violence is by getting more guns to people. And that's never a way to stop violence. But we continue to do that. And the same is true for this war. The Ukrainians are asking for weapons, and we're saying, oh, here we go. We'll give you all these weapons, and this will assure you that you'll win. Which is nonsense. You don't win with violence. You only win with nonviolence, with peace. If it was true that you could win by violence, Jesus Christ, at his time when he was living, he would certainly have given weapons to all the people who says, let's overturn the Roman Empire. But he didn't do that. Instead, he said, love them, do good to them, and we will be better off. We will have peace. So what I say to the Ukrainians and I say to the Americans, let's stop encouraging people to do violence, thinking that this will cause some kind of great, wonderful end. We need to start disarming, starting with our own people, get rid of the guns, get rid of the ways that people continue to think that they can change the world. You can change the world for the good only by love and not by weapons. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, well, actually, next up is me. I'm Steve Watrous. I'm the president of the UNA chapter of Greater Milwaukee. I'm not speaking officially on its behalf. We have a deliberative process, sort of like the UN itself, in coming to decisions. But I'm also not speaking on behalf of the FCNL and Peace Action or the Interfaith Peace Working Group or the others I have some level of activity with. I would like to speak on behalf of the UN itself for a change. We're not the UN, but the UN has been active on this issue. People in the UN tried really hard to prevent this war from going out of control, and are still trying really hard and are quite active doing things to try and deal with the fallout of the war in Ukraine, even as we speak. But let me say a little bit from the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, and here's a newsflash. He delivered a blunt assessment of the global landscape in his statement on February 6th. Quote, we have started 2023 staring down the barrel of a confluence of challenges unlike any other in our lifetimes. He said, this is to the General Assembly. And then he goes on to say, it starts with the right to peace. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is inflicting untold suffering on the Ukrainian people with profound global implications. The prospects for peace keep diminishing. The chances of further escalation and bloodshed keep growing. I fear the world is not sleepwalking into a wider war. I feel it is doing so with its eyes wide open. But the world needs peace, and peace in line with the United Nations Charter and international law. We must work harder for peace everywhere. good words, I think. So here's a news flash. Just yesterday, the UN General Assembly on Thursday called for ending the war in Ukraine and demanded Russia's immediate withdrawal from the country in line with the UN Charter. As it resumed, that is, the General Assembly resumed its special session, the world body adopted a new resolution calling for an end to the war only hours before the conflict enters its second year on Friday. That's why we're here today on Friday. And it was 141 in favor of this, 7 against, 32 abstentions. And the Assembly reiterated its demand for a cessation of hostilities. And so, one more news flash. It says, progressives reintroduced People Over Pentagon Act. On Wednesday, Representatives Barbara Lee and Mark McCann, who you know is from Madison, reintroduced their People Over Pentagon Act that would redirect $100 billion from the Pentagon budget towards urgent domestic priorities. And we got to end this war, and there's so many crying needs in this country to do things with that money, so I hope we can move ahead on that. And so then moving along, next up is Mark Easy from the Racine Coalition for Peace and Justice, a long-time active group down there doing great work.
Thank you. Steve mentioned the UN Charter. There's under the title Principles of International Order, a fellow on counterpunch.org mentioned what Article 2, parentheses 3 of the UN Charter mentions. It says, it obliges all states to settle disputes by peaceful means. This means obligation to negotiate means good faith dialogue with the goal to reach compromise. There is no right to intransigence in the UN Charter. If one party refuses to talk, it is violating Article 2.3 and actually provoking the other to use force. Before he resorted to war, Putin had what peace activist David Swanson regarded as reasonable demands, which were completely ignored. Similarly, once an armed conflict has broken out, the obligation to negotiate in good faith persists. The refusal to negotiate peace, the deliberate prolongation of a war, expecting victory or unconditional surrender is obsolete in the nuclear world. It's incompatible with the UN Charter and constitutes both a crime against peace and a crime against humanity. Let's see. Peace activist David Swanson, he has a website, davidswanson.org. He has a lot of great information. He had like a slogan at one point, make a good bumper sticker, Russia out of Ukraine, NATO out of existence. There's no more Warsaw Pact, why is there a NATO? Before the war, Raytheon CEO Greg Hayes was looking forward to, he actually said he fully expects the rising tensions of Eastern Europe, that it'll benefit Raytheon. Raytheon and other arms merchants will never tell you that Erica Chenoweth, who wrote Why Civil Resistance Works, between 1900 and 2006, campaigns of nonviolent resistance were more than twice as effective as violent counterparts. And Gene Sharp compiled 198 methods of nonviolent action. So if Ukraine, instead of getting arms shipments, would try to do some of the 198 actions, we might be getting toward peace. Thanks.
Thank you all for your great attention. We're actually getting close to the end of the program here. Reverend Greg Lewis hasn't come in unnoticed by me, has he?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right, so then next up is another really long-time peace activist, Art Heitzer, the co-founder of the Wisconsin Coalition to Normalize Relations with Cuba.
Thank you, Steve, and for everyone for attending on this winter day. So I'm not speaking officially for the coalition, since we have not taken a position, although we have had lively discussions about the Ukraine war and Cuba's position on it, which has been hailed by many peace activists as an example of what peace movement might focus on. So 2 days before the start of the Russian intervention in Ukraine, Cuba issued a statement advocating a diplomatic solution through dialogue and calling for preservation of international peace and security. Instead, of course, military conflict began, and Cuba's official position is entitled this: Cuba advocates for a solution that guarantees the security and sovereignty of all. And this, unlike some of the kind of hooray for our side resolutions and statements, both criticized the Russian beginning of this current war as non-observation of legal principles and international law, which Cuba vigorously subscribes to and supports, and are an essential reference, particularly for small countries, against the abuse of power and injustice by larger powers. Cuba is a country that defends international law and is committed to the Charter of the United Nations, which will always defend peace and oppose the threat of force or use of force against any state. And you may know that Cuba has had positive relations with both Ukraine and Russia. After the Chernobyl nuclear accident, Cuba, more than any other country, has treated tens of thousands of victims of Chernobyl for the long term, not just for a week or something, but for many of them are still in Cuba being treated. Steve mentioned the UN votes, and it's interesting how our media covers some UN votes in the General Assembly and ignores others. So yesterday there was a vote, as Steve said, 141, I think, countries out of almost 200 in the UN voted for the resolution. A number of countries abstained because they did not see that it balanced some of the provocations from NATO, etc., in the creation of this conflict and the need to address those to resolve it. Those countries, aside from Cuba, who abstained, included many countries in Africa, including South Africa, most of the big countries of Asia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, China, and others. So it did not speak for most of the world, but it did speak for the majority of the members. Finally, I think we should take the example from Cuba and others. As Steve mentioned, China has just issued a proposal for a basis for negotiations to call for an immediate ceasefire, same position as the Vatican, and for peace negotiations. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Art. And now, from Racine, we have a speaker who's involved with the Wisconsin Building Unity Project, and who's going to give us something special, Dinah Valencia.
Hello, everybody. The special I'm going to give is in English and in Spanish. We are asking the public to join us. Turn it on? Okay. Okay. We are asking the public to join us as we call for an end to the war in Ukraine. Closer? Louder? Okay. We are asking everyone to contact their members of Congress, urging them to ask President Biden to start peace negotiations now. Diplomacy, negotiate, not escalate. So call representatives and senators using the Capitol switchboard. Write this down: 202-224-3121. 202-224-3121. Now go to Spanish. Estamos pidiendo al público que se una a nosotros. Pedimos el fin de la guerra en Ucrania. Les pedimos a todos que se comuniquen con sus miembros del Congreso a que le pidan al presidente Biden que inicie negociaciones de paz. Ahora, hay que negociar, no escalar. Llama a su representante y senadores usando el teléfono del Capitolio. Lo voy a repetir. 202-224-3121. 202-224-3121. Now I will teach you a little Spanish. Queremos paz. Queremos paz. ¿Cuándo? Oh, okay. ¿Cuándo? ¿Cuándo? Okay. ¿Queremos? 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 ¿Cuándo? 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 Now English. We want peace. We want peace. We want peace. When do we want it? Now. When do we want it? Now. When do we want it? Now. Sí se puede. Sí se puede. Sí se puede.
Sí se puede.
Gracias, Diana. So we're about to wrap up here. The petitions have been going around, and we need to find those and also offer you an opportunity to sign on if you haven't had it passed by yet. We want to get lots of people. We've got about 50 people or so here. We get them all on that petition to take to our elected officials. That would be great. Thank you all for coming. Thanks especially for the speakers who prepared really punchy, time-limited statements. I think it worked out well. And we want people that can stay around for a picture will be coming up in front. But now that Deanna has sort of warmed up.
I just want to say about the social media. So it's disappointing that only one news station was here, but we make our own news. So thank you, Tom. Thank you, Jess. You're going to get that around. We can bypass corporate news with social media, right? And in the long run, what we need to do is change the minds of our elected officials. So that's why we want you to sign this petition, and then we're going to contact you to go visit our elected officials and pressure them to meet our demands. And so part of this pressuring and part of this social media is taking a picture with us, because a picture can be worth 1,000 words. We got lots of signs all over the place here. Take a sign, hold the sign, get in front here, and our great photographers will take a picture and we'll get this on social media. And I need to know where the other petition is. I don't know if I have it somewhere, or I'll look for it. But there's one more petition around. Is it back there, Pam? All right. So, all right, bring that up and make sure everybody's, if you haven't signed it, please sign it. And we'll contact you to let you know when we're going to try to arrange a meeting with our elected officials. But Steve will wrap up, and then please stay around for a group picture. Thank you all for doing this. It truly was a group project. It's a beautiful place. Thank you.
There's actually many groups involved. If you want to know more about any of them, the speakers can stay around for a minute. If you want to ask something or offer to help, that would be great. And so, just as we come up here for the photo op, let me repeat what I mentioned earlier from the Pope, and that is, it is in thinking first of all of them, young people and children, that we must repeat together, never again war. Let's hear you. Never again war. Never again war. Never again war. One more. Never again war.